Good morning and welcome to the Core Connection. I'm Mira Rubin here with you on Enlightened World Network, and today's topic is invitations. We have an ongoing invitation to engage with life at all different levels, and the invitation specifically today is to bring the light, and it should be a fun conversation. So before we get started, let's take a minute or two to get present. Let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells, all your organs, bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And this time, imagine brilliant, bright light lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, and energizing all your cells, your molecules, your electrons, creating a brilliant beam of light and energy from your heart out into the world. And as you exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's press our palms together. Vigorously rub your hands together to feel the friction, the temperature, the pressure, the motion, the tickling and tingling when you stop. And allow all those sensations to bring you present right here, right now, into this remarkable physical form that enables us to experience life. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So, invitations. What if we were to view life as just a series of generous invitations? And the invitation specifically that we want to discuss this morning is bring the invitation to bring the light. So when we've all heard the saying, it's darkest before the dawn. When we have an experience of darkness. Oh, good morning, Rosalind. Welcome. So good to have you joining us this morning. We're talking about invitations to bring the light. So it's becoming clearer and clearer and clearer to me that one of the most impactful contributions we can make is to bring and maintain the light. And the times that it becomes most challenging are the times when it's most important. And in those times of those challenging moments, we are often made to believe that the darkness is winning or that the darkness is proliferating. And it can be very tempting and natural to fall into some kind of despair or hopelessness or resignation around what seems to be a rise of the darkness. But we can take that rather than falling into getting sucked into the vortex of that conversation, we can take that as an invitation and an opportunity to redouble the light. Because the truth is, and I think that this is more than a subjective truth, but that's just what I think. So you feel in for yourselves. But when we allow ourselves to get sucked into the vortex of negativity, what happens? We're contributing to that. We're validating it. We're reinforcing it. And most importantly, we are disempowering ourselves. Most importantly, we're allowing our own light to be dimmed. And that by default feeds darkness, right? If we are not being the light that we can be, then the darkness has a greater presence. It just does, right? So by empowering ourselves, by staying in the light, by nurturing our ability to be positive, we are feeding the light. And I had a really interesting conversation with someone over the weekend who was in deep despair and fear, and a couple people actually, and terror, and all those helpless, hopeless kinds of emotions. And we were able to get to the place of understanding that that doesn't serve anybody. We tend to make up stories, like this person was talking about how they felt like if they didn't watch the news, if they didn't stay on top of whatever's happening, that they were like an ostrich hiding their head in the sand. And there are two responses that I have to that. One is to recognize that the news is not truth. What may be presented on the news, I'm not saying that it's not true, although sometimes who knows, but I'm saying that it is a very particular view of what's true. It's a very carefully curated story that is designed to perpetuate fear and anxiety. I imagine we have all heard the saying, if it bleeds, it leads. So the news that we tend to see on news programs is news that is upsetting news. It's not the only news. It's not the only truth. It's a very carefully sorted and selected group of stories. And typically, these stories are anxiety producing, upset producing. They're not typically uplifting, hopeful stories, of which there are equally as many that are available to be told. So that's to dispel the notion that if we're not watching the news, we're somehow not being responsible citizens. And we don't know what's going on in the world, because the news is showing us a very select segment of things that are going on in the world, where there's a huge range of things that aren't being shown on the news. So that's one thing. If we can watch the news with curiosity, to say, oh, I wonder, like, what's the perspective that's being promoted here? What's the vantage point that is being that is driving this information? Then that's one thing. If we watch the news saying this is what's happening in the world in a totality, that's completely something else, where we then become very much more subject to whatever the vantage point is of the messaging, the underlying messaging. Okay, so what I'm talking about here is taking a meta perspective of the news as this generalized story that's being crafted and promoted versus something that is complete and whole and an accurate reflection of our reality. That's one thing. So this notion of not being responsible citizens if we don't watch the news, I think is rather limited and misinformed. Anyway, which is interesting because typically we would watch the news so that we could stay informed, right? But what are we being informed about? That's a big question, and it's an important question. And it's an important question that should guide our news sources as well, to say, where are we getting our information? So next is this notion of how the news affects us, because we often will watch the news and then get caught into this vortex of upset around the information we're receiving. And I likened it to an alcoholic in recovery going into a bar. And so when someone's in recovery, you do not put them in a position where they are going to be bombarded by all the triggers, by all the stimuli that throw them into a spiral. And so, because this person was saying, well, I don't feel comfortable just, farting rainbows and starlight, that they felt that not engaging with the news was being in a fantasy world. And I think that notion, first off, is presuming that the news itself isn't creating some kind of fantasy world of its own, even if the facts that they're reporting are true, but that somehow finding a way to be positive was delusional. And there's plenty going on in the world to be enlivened by and activated by and hopeful about. There's plenty happening that is life affirming. So putting our attention there, why do we as a culture somehow value putting our attention on what's wrong rather than on what's right or what's working or what's emerging or what's possible? Why is it that we have this idea that if we're being positive, we're being delusional, but if we're being negative, somehow we're present to the truth? Can you get what a fallacy that is? Can you hear how distorted that sounds? It's just that culturally, we have been indoctrinated to a culture of fear, anxiety, destruction, etc., danger, right? So to keep us afraid, if we're afraid, and just think this through for a minute, if we're afraid, if we're anxious, if we get sucked into vortex of those stories, then what happens to us physically is we end up in a storm of cortisol and adrenaline and all this chemical responsiveness in our body and being that overwhelms our adrenals, that literally narrows our vision so that we can't see what else is going on. We become, we go into a state of fight or flight, reactivity. In other words, we become vastly less resourceful, and our physical health is actually affected. Because what happens when we're in fight or flight is that our bodies can't focus. They take the energy away from growth and from recovery and from rebuilding. And they put all their attention to dealing with a threat. So the invitation, back to the invitation here, is to be the light. And the power of that is that light radiates, that light warms, that light impacts others, as does our fear and anxiety. So if we allow ourselves to be the light and to be present, to be as a beingness, to engender the light, to engender the values that we hold, the values of kindness, the values of compassion, of connection. If we allow ourselves to be in that state, rather than being in a state of fear and anxiety and resignation and hopelessness and all those things, if we allow ourselves to be the light and present, that's where our power lies. Then we are empowered. Then we are present to choice rather than reaction, responsiveness, responsibility rather than reactivity. And so in the darkness, or even in the light, being the light propagates light. And that's something within our power for each and every one of us, is to make those choices of the reality we're choosing to live into and create. So reality, we're also conditioned to believe that reality is something that's fixed, that resides outside of us. But each of us, and there may be something that resides outside of us. But each of us, each of us lives within our own interpretations and our own experiences of that reality. And we help to propagate that through our beingness, through our choices, through the messages that we give ourselves through, and others, through the beliefs that we propagate, through the emotions that we experience. And so the question for all of us at this moment is, what are the invitations that we are accepting? We're invited into a vortex of fear and anxiety and hopelessness. And we can also manufacture for ourselves or find other invitations to light and to hopefulness and to possibility. I was watching a newscaster this morning. I know we were talking about the news and kind of curating our experience, who was saying, you know what? This is an opportunity to activate the values, to bring alive and to become more actively engaged in the things to which we're committed. And part of that to me is this spreading of the light, is this active engagement in creating the world that we want to see. It's not denial to recognize that every moment provides us with endless possibility. And yes, there are all kinds of things going on in the world, but we can engage with them in a multitude of ways. And we don't have to be subject to the way that other people are telling us how to engage with those things. We can generate, we can actually create, we can generate, we can I guess just the words are create, generate. I was looking for other words, but we can determine the quality of our experience and the quality of our presence and the quality of where we're putting our commitment, the quality of our commitment and where we're putting those commitments. Because where we put our energy multiplies. So it's ever more important to be directing our energy in a way that is in alignment with our deepest commitments. Commitments to love, commitments to kindness, commitments to peace, commitments to potentials and possibilities and positivity. Not in a way of denial, but in a way of being. So let's bring the light. That's it for today. I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection, and I go live here each weekday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page and YouTube channel. And I invite you to like, follow, and share Enlightened World Network and me. The links are in the chat. In the description. And so until next time, it is always my privilege and pleasure to spend this time with you, musing over what it is to be human. So until next time.